The afternoon sun was melting over the Pacific Ocean, casting a blinding, golden-hour glare across the white quartz counters of the Malibu estate. I was standing in the cavernous, minimalist kitchen, a precision digital scale in front of me, weighing exactly 45 grams of organic, triple-strained bone broth concentrate. My hair was clipped back tightly, my black chef's coat buttoned to the chin, and my feet were planted in non-slip, orthotic kitchen clogs designed for 16-hour shifts. I was about to walk into the glass-walled dining pavilion to ask Julian Vance if he wanted his evening electrolyte infusion served over crushed ice or at room temperature. Then, the floor-to-ceiling glass pivot door swung open, and the serenity of Malibu was instantly shattered by a cinematic gasp. I knew it, a voice wailed, perfectly modulating its pitch to mimic a Netflix drama climax. It's always the same. The ink on my visa isn't even dry, and you've already filled my space. You've brought a literal replacement into our sanctuary, Julian. I stopped dead in my tracks, holding a silicone spatula like a defensive weapon. Standing in the limestone entryway was a woman who looked like she had been engineered in a goop laboratory. She was wrapped in layers of sheer, ivory linen that probably cost equivalent to a down payment on a Tesla, her skin glowing with the aggressive hydration of someone who had spent the last 6 months doing a silent spiritual retreat in Ubud. Tears were already welling in her eyes, pooling perfectly without ruining her waterproof mascara. She pointed a manicured, diamond-crusted finger directly at my chest. A replacement? I muttered under my breath, glancing down at my bleach-stained apron and my functional, grease-resistant uniform. If this was a casting call for a romantic stand-in, the wardrobe department had completely failed me. Before Julian could even open his mouth, she swept into the living room, her linen skirt billowing behind her like a sail. No wonder your texts grew so cold these past few months. No wonder you stopped sending the private jet to pick me up from Bali. You had a new little pet to play with. You threw me away, your twin flame, your absolute cosmic first love, like I was a disposable green juice bottle. Her voice hit a dramatic crescendo that made the expensive minimalist vases rattle. And now that I've returned from my journey of self-discovery, you can't even bear to look me in the eye. Fine. If my presence disturbs your little domestic arrangement, I'll just throw myself back into the wilderness. I stood there, utterly dumbfounded. Was I not Dr. Vivian Blake? The elite culinary clinical nutritionist Julian Vance had personally headhunted from the Mayo Clinic, offering a staggering $1.2 million annual contract plus stock options just to manage his severe, stress-induced peptic ulcer disease and chronic gastrointestinal inflammation. I had a master's degree in metabolic biochemistry and a doctorate in dietetics. How on earth had I just been demoted from a high-earning medical professional to a cliched daytime soap opera villain? Julian Vance himself looked like he wanted the earth to swallow him whole. He was leaning against the sofa, his hand pressed firmly against his upper abdomen, a classic sign that his stomach acid was already spiking in response to the stress. Serafina, what are you talking about? Julian groaned, his voice laced with absolute exhaustion. You were gone for 3 months on a soul-cleansing pilgrimage. I literally wired you $80,000 every 2 weeks for your ashram fees. How is that throwing you away? He gestured vaguely toward me with a trembling hand. And this is Dr. Blake. She is my clinical nutritionist and private medical chef. She's not whatever bizarre fantasy you've cooked up in your head. A nutritionist? Serafina choked out, a single, flawless tear finally tracking down her cheek. She pointed dramatically at my white-trimmed collar. Since when are nutritionists under 35, and why is she wearing pristine white? White is our color, Julian. It's the color of the spiritual awakening we shared in Sedona. If that isn't a cosmic manifestation of her trying to step into my aura, what is? Darling, you don't have to lie to protect her feelings. I looked down at my double-breasted, heavy-duty cotton utility jacket, then at her ethereal, floating Italian linen dress. The only thing our outfits had in common was the complete absence of pigment. An involuntary twitch started at the corner of my left eye. I took a deep, controlled breath, deciding to intervene with cold, clinical logic. "Miss Sterling," I said, my voice deadpan and professional. "I assure you, I am strictly here on a W-2 basis. If you harbor any doubts regarding my function in this household, you are more than welcome to accompany me to the clinical prep station. I currently have a low FODMAP, pH-balanced gastroduodenal recovery broth simmering at exactly 165 degrees Fahrenheit. It contains 0 allergens, 0 spices, and 0 emotional subtext." Serafina instantly clapped her hands over her ears, stomping her designer leather slide against the limestone floor. "I'm not listening to this clinical jargon. I'm not. Even if there is a broth, you probably just put it on the stove to create an alibi. You knew I was coming back today. You're trying to gaslight me out of my own love story." Julian looked so incredibly drained that his posture had completely collapsed. He shot me a desperate, pleading look. "Serafina, please. What will it take for you to understand that Vivian is an employee? A highly specialized, critical employee? Fire her," Serafina demanded instantly, the tears magically stopping as a triumphant, razor-sharp glint flashed in her eyes. "Fire her right now, and I'll believe you." She crossed her arms tightly over her chest, looking like an influencer who had just successfully exposed a corporate conspiracy on TikTok. "I've read the think pieces. I know how this algorithm works. The original muse and the corporate substitute cannot occupy the same physical space. It's only a matter of time before she uses her wellness advice to poison your mind against me. I won't lose our manifestation, Julian. She has to leave this property today." Hearing this, Julian's frown deepened into a crater. He shot a hesitant, incredibly guilty glance in my direction. His gastric lining had only just begun to regenerate after 2 months of my strict, alkaline-heavy cellular repair protocol. He was nowhere near ready to return to the chaotic world of post-production catering, high-stress boardroom espresso shots, and over-the-counter antacids that had landed him in the emergency room in the first place. But it was entirely clear that Serafina was prepared to stage a full-scale sit-in on the Malibu highway if she didn't get a narrative victory. The silence in the entryway stretched out like a high-tension wire. Finally, Julian made his choice. He walked over to my prep station, keeping his distance but lowering his voice to a hushed, apologetic whisper. "Vivian. Dr. Blake. I know our executive contract specifies a live-in arrangement in the guest villa," he began, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. "But given the highly charged emotional atmosphere, I'm going to have to ask you to temporarily relocate to my penthouse overlooking Wilshire Boulevard in Beverly Hills. It's fully furnished." My ears perked up instantly. Beverly Hills? I'll cover the daily black car commute down the Pacific Coast Highway, obviously, Julian added quickly, terrified I would walk out on his ulcer. "I will double your daily operational rate for the inconvenience, and I'll immediately authorize a 3-month base salary bonus to be wired to your account by tomorrow morning. How does that sound?" My eyes lit up internally like a Vegas slot machine hitting a mega jackpot. Double my rate? A 3-month bonus on a 7-figure salary just to live in a luxury penthouse closer to the upscale organic markets? This wasn't an inconvenience. This was a financial windfall disguised as a rich girl's temper tantrum. I nodded so quickly I nearly gave myself whiplash, keeping my face perfectly serene. That is entirely acceptable, Mr. Vance. In fact, to facilitate your cosmic alignment, would you like me to vacate the premises immediately? I can have my specialized equipment packed in 20 minutes. Julian blinked, utterly taken aback. He had clearly expected me to throw a professional fit, demand legal mediation, or at least show a sliver of emotional distress. A flicker of something complicated and slightly bruised crossed his face, but he quickly masked it, nodding tightly. Yes, he said, his voice dropping into a flat, defeated tone. That would be best for the house energy. I practically floated out of the kitchen to grab my things. The Beverly Hills penthouse was waiting, and my bank account was about to look absolutely heroic. The private moving service Julian hired operated with the terrifying efficiency of a military black ops team. Within 45 minutes, my clinical knives, my specialized low-temperature dehydrators, and my suitcases were loaded into a matte black Sprinter van. As I stood by the driveway directing the final crate of medical-grade supplements, Serafina sauntered out onto the travertine driveway, a cold-pressed green juice cradled in her hand like a trophy. She looked down at me from the top of the concrete steps, her expression dripping with smug superiority. "See, Vivian," she purred, taking a slow sip. "You can try to manifest your way into a man's lifestyle while his twin flame is away expanding her consciousness, but the universe always corrects itself. In the end, you're the one being packed into a van and shipped off to the valley. In Julian's destiny, I am the only fixed point. A corporate stand-in will always just be a temporary placeholder." Right at that exact second, the smartphone in my coat pocket buzzed with a heavy, double vibration. I pulled it out. It was an instant notification from my private banking app. A wire transfer of $350,000 had just cleared into my liquid savings account, courtesy of Vance Media Holdings, LLC. I looked up from the screen, and suddenly, Serafina's smug, heavily contoured face looked absolutely angelic to me. She wasn't an annoying, boundary-stomping nightmare anymore. She was my primary financial benefactor, the beautiful, chaotic catalyst for my early retirement fund. I broke into a wide, radiant, completely genuine smile. "You are completely right, Miss Sterling. Your energetic bond with Mr. Vance is truly unparalleled. I wouldn't dream of comparing my professional presence to your cosmic significance. Enjoy the estate." Serafina sniffed, momentarily thrown off by my absolute lack of resistance. She adjusted her linen wrap, trying to regain her footing. "At least you recognize your structural place in the hierarchy. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go unlock the meditation tower. The one Julian keeps sealed off, filled with our old Polaroids from Coachella, where he goes to weep when the longing becomes too heavy." Standing near the van was Marcus, Julian's chief of security and personal assistant, a former Marine who usually possessed the emotional expression of a granite wall. Marcus let out a muffled, completely bewildered sound. "Ma'am. I don't believe such a tower exists. That room is just the server closet for the property's smart home automation and fiber optic routing." Serafina's voice instantly shot up an octave, her serene facade cracking. "How dare you? Of course it exists. In every true twin flame journey, when the divine feminine goes on a quest, the masculine builds a sacred shrine room that no one is permitted to enter. If your security clearance is too low to know about the Heartbreak Sanctuary, just say so, Marcus. Don't project your lack of romantic awareness onto Julian's devotion." I simply shook my head, climbed into the back of the Sprinter van, and offered a silent, 2-second prayer for Marcus's mental health. He was going to need every ounce of his military training to survive the next month. Life in the Wilshire Boulevard penthouse was absolute heaven. The building had 24-hour white-glove concierge service, an infinity pool overlooking the city lights, and a kitchen that looked like a professional culinary laboratory. My actual duties became ridiculously simple. 3 times a day, Marcus would pull up to the secure basement garage in a tinted SUV. I would hand over carefully labeled, temperature-controlled, vacuum-sealed glass containers containing Julian's scientifically measured meals. Marcus would speed back to Malibu, sneak the food into the estate through the service entrance, and ensure Julian ate it away from Serafina's watchful, spiritual eyes. The rest of the day belonged entirely to me. I spent my afternoons shopping for organic microgreens, getting facial treatments in Rodeo Drive, and catching up on my medical journals. I felt my skin clearing up, the professional burnout was melting away. Marcus, however, was visibly deteriorating. Within 10 days, the poor man looked like he had been dragged through a psychological warfare camp. The dark circles under his eyes were deep purple, and his usually immaculate suit looked wrinkled. One morning, during our clandestine underground garage handoff, I handed him a bottle of fresh celery juice and couldn't help but ask, "Marcus, are you holding up okay? You look like you haven't entered REM sleep since the solar eclipse." Marcus grabbed the glass bottle like a drowning man grabbing a life preserver. He let out a long, ragged sigh that seemed to shake his entire frame. "Dr. Blake, I am on the verge of filing for a mental health leave. That woman is going to cause a total operational collapse." He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a panicked whisper. On her second day back, she demanded Julian terminate my contract immediately. The reason? Because when she asked me to confirm that she was the first woman to ever breathe the air in the Malibu master suite, I told her the truth, that the house was previously owned by a billionaire real estate mogul who lived there with his wife and 4 daughters. She claimed my literal historical facts were an attack on her manifestations. My eyebrows shot up. "Did Julian fire you?" "No," Julian defended me, which made it worse, Marcus groaned, rubbing his temples. The next day, she asked me if it was true that Julian hadn't smiled a single time during her 3-month absence. I told her that he actually smiled quite a bit, specifically when his quarterly earnings report came out and when your gastrointestinal broth successfully cured his abdominal spasms. She got so incredibly enraged that she threw her gold-plated wellness crystal directly at my phone, shattering the screen. She keeps demanding I provide her with a log of Julian's subconscious longings. Listening to Marcus unleash a literal week's worth of terrifying grievances, a profound wave of relief washed over me. I had dodged an absolute tactical missile. If I had remained at the Malibu estate, I would have been dragged into her daily, multi-part reality TV melodrama. That level of cortisol exposure shaves actual decades off your life expectancy. But my safety turned out to be completely temporary. My peaceful penthouse existence came to a screeching halt on a Tuesday afternoon when my secure video intercom began buzzing with the frantic, aggressive rhythm of a fire alarm. I opened the door, and Serafina instantly shoved past me, storming into my private living room like a conquering general entering a defeated city. Serafina marched through my penthouse, her eyes sweeping over the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Italian leather furniture, and the panoramic view of the Los Angeles basin with a look of absolute, triumphant fury. She spun around to face me, her hands planted on her hips. "I knew it," she shouted, her voice trembling with cinematic betrayal. "I knew your compliance was too perfect. You left the Malibu house without a fight because Julian had this secret love nest waiting for you all along. You've been hiding out here in luxury, playing the role of the kept woman while I've been trying to clear the negative energy from our estate. An intense headache instantly began forming right behind my eyes. I wanted her out of my sanctuary immediately. "Miss Sterling," I said, my voice cutting through her drama like a scalpel. "I am a licensed clinical dietitian and a corporate contractor. That is the entirety of the situation. If your spiritual intuition is failing to process that fact, I can gladly show you the fully executed corporate employment contract." I walked over to my minimalist desk, retrieved the laminated folder containing my executive agreement, and flipped to the compensation page. $1 million? She shrieked, her voice cracking as she read the figure. She snatched the paper from my hands, slamming it down onto the marble coffee table with a bitter, venomous laugh. "Do you really think I'm that naive, Vivian? No chef makes $1 million a year just to chop vegetables. This isn't a professional salary. This is a retainer. This is what a billionaire pays to keep his secret muse tucked away in Beverly Hills so his public image stays clean. This contract is a legal cover-up for an emotional affair." That was the absolute final straw. I had spent 8 years in brutal academic institutions, logged thousands of clinical residency hours, and built an impeccable reputation in metabolic health. To have my medical expertise and professional labor reduced to a romantic cover-up by a woman whose entire career consisted of selling overpriced moonlight-infused facial mists was a direct, insulting attack on my life's work. My professional patience snapped like a dry twig. I pulled out my phone, bypassed the assistant line, and dialed Julian's direct private cell. "Mr. Vance," I said, my tone ice-cold and dangerously sharp the moment he picked up. "Could you please come to my location immediately and manage your twin flame? She has breached my private residence and is currently insulting my clinical credentials." A heavy, incredibly miserable groan echoed through the receiver. "She's there? Oh God. Put her on speaker, Vivian." Serafina snatched the phone from my hand, her face a mask of righteous indignation. "Julian. I've exposed her. I found the contract. How could you lie to me about?" "Serafina, shut up," Julian's voice snapped through the speaker, completely devoid of his usual patience. The sheer authority in his tone made her freeze. "Leave Dr. Blake's apartment right now. She is a medical professional. If you interfere with her contract or compromise her security again, I am canceling the automated funding for your wellness foundation. Do you understand me? Put Marcus on the line if he's downstairs. You are crossing a legal line." The color completely drained from Serafina's face. She stared at the phone as if it had personally betrayed her. She shot me a look of pure, concentrated venom, muttered a quick, trembling, "I understand, Julian," and hung up. Drawing herself up to her full height, she tried desperately to regain her haughty, untouchable posture. "You got lucky today, Vivian. Julian is clearly being manipulated by whatever toxic energy you've put in his food. But don't think this story is over. A cheap, clinical imitation can never compare to the cosmic resonance of a true first love. He'll wake up soon." With that final script line, she stormed out of the penthouse, slamming the heavy oak door so hard that my designer wall sconces vibrated. I stood there, phone in hand, seriously considering sending Julian a separate invoice for emotional hazard mitigation. To avoid any further dramatic confrontations, I refused to let Marcus pick up the meals for the next few days. Instead, I stayed firmly inside my Beverly Hills fortress. But a few days later, Marcus arrived at my door, holding not just the empty glass containers, but also a thick, heavy cream-colored envelope embossed with gold leaf. It was an official invitation to a cosmic homecoming gala for Serafina, hosted at the Malibu estate. I stared at the elaborate cursive text, and the throbbing in my temples returned instantly. I opened my mouth to give Marcus a flat, absolute refusal, but the security chief quickly raised a hand, a knowing, almost sympathetic smile on his face. "Before you say no, Dr. Blake. Mr. Vance specifically instructed me to deliver a message," Marcus said smoothly. "Miss Sterling was completely insistent on your attendance to prove there is no bad blood. Mr. Vance said that if you agree to attend this event as a guest to keep the peace, Vance Media Holdings will compensate you at 10 times your prorated daily rate for weekend overtime." My entire professional attitude did an immediate, spectacular 180-degree turn. 10 times my daily rate? That was roughly $40,000 for a single evening of standing around looking pretty. "Well, Marcus," I said, smiling warmly as I took the invitation. "We mustn't let Mr. Vance's house energy suffer. When my primary client requires my presence for operational stability, it is my absolute professional honor to attend. Tell him I'll be there by 8. The Malibu estate was transformed into a high society wonderland. The elite of Los Angeles, tech billionaires, Oscar-winning producers, old-money real estate heirs, and venture capitalists were mingling on the illuminated terrace. When I arrived, dressed in a sharp, tailored black silk jumpsuit that looked like an editorial spread, Serafina was seated at the grand Steinway piano in the living pavilion. She was bathed in a soft, dramatic spotlight, playing a melancholic, ethereal melody, looking for all the world like a tragic, beautiful goddess. The moment I stepped through the glass doors, the atmosphere in my immediate vicinity shifted. To my surprise, several of the city's most prominent figures, including a high-profile studio head and an old-money philanthropist whose husband I had recently treated for severe diverticulitis, immediately abandoned their conversations and gravitated toward me. "Vivian, my dear," the studio head exclaimed, raising his glass. "Does your presence here mean you're catering the late-night lounge? Please tell me you brought that gut-healing ginger turmeric infusion. My stomach hasn't felt right since the Oscars." Dr. Blake, a prominent venture capitalist, chimed in, leaning closer. "Are you accepting any private client offers outside of the Vance contract? My corporate board is practically begging to put you on a retainer for our executive wellness program. Name your price. We will double your current buyout clause." The ambient piano music stopped with a sharp, discordant screech. Every single head in the room turned toward the piano. Serafina had stood up so fast she had knocked over her velvet bench. She picked up a wireless microphone that was resting on the music stand, her eyes blazing with absolute fury as she stared at the crowd of influential billionaires surrounding a mere chef. For those of you who don't know, Serafina's voice echoed through the high-end sound system, her tone dripping with passive-aggressive venom. "I am Serafina Sterling, Julian's true cosmic partner. The woman you are all fawning over is nothing but a clinical technician, a transactional, temporary replacement brought in while I was away." A few executives exchanged deeply uncomfortable, bewildered glances. In the cynical, high-stakes world of Los Angeles wealth, nobody cared about cosmic partners. Everyone cared about their digestion, their longevity, and their health data. After a brief, awkward pause, the guests simply turned their backs on the microphone, completely ignoring her outburst, and resumed asking me about my metabolic research. Serafina was practically vibrating with rage. She genuinely believed I had brainwashed the city's elite. Desperate to regain control of the narrative, a cruel, calculating smile spread across her face. She glided down the steps, her linen dress shimmering under the landscape lighting, her voice amplified by the microphone. "Our guests are far too polite," Serafina said sweetly into the mic, "but I've heard rumors, Vivian, that outside of your clinical expertise with pureed soups, you are an incredibly accomplished classical pianist. Surely, someone receiving so much elite praise wouldn't mind sharing her art with the room?" I stared at her for 3 seconds. Then I looked at the grand piano, and then at the guests, who were all suddenly pretending not to be intensely entertained by the wealthy drama unfolding before them. Serafina's smile widened into a trap. "Unless, of course, your qualifications are strictly limited to the kitchen." I wouldn't want to cause an awkward moment. It was a classic Hollywood ambush, wrapped in silk. I calmly placed my mineral water glass onto a passing waiter's silver tray. "Miss Sterling," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the open pavilion. "My corporate contract is structured to optimize gastric lining, not concert halls." A few old money matriarchs laughed softly behind their champagne flutes. Serafina's eyes narrowed into slits. "Then you admit you lack the refinement for this instrument?" "No," I replied smoothly, stepping toward the piano. "I am simply stating that if you require specialized performances outside of my nutritional scope of work, there must be an additional billing protocol." Across the room, Julian Vance pinched the bridge of his nose in sheer, unadulterated exhaustion. Marcus, standing near the security doors with his hands folded, muttered under his breath, "I will immediately prepare the supplemental line item paperwork." "I simply believe," Serafina announced to the crowd, "that anyone residing in Julian's properties should demonstrate whether they truly possess the elegance to belong in a room of this caliber." The entire room fell silent. Not because they agreed with her, but because ultra-wealthy people love nothing more than watching someone make a catastrophic public mistake. I could have refused. I wanted to. I hadn't driven down the highway to perform like a trained seal for an influencer's validation. But refusing would allow her to control the final edit of the night. So, I smiled, walked up to the Steinway, and sat down on the bench. I was not a concert virtuoso. I didn't have a tragic childhood spent practicing 10 hours a day in a European conservatory. But high-end medical consulting required poise, rhythmic precision, and the ability to navigate elite rooms without flinching. I had taken classical lessons for a decade to maintain mental discipline. I played something clean, sharp, and minimalist, a modern composition by Philip Glass. It was soft, rhythmically flawless, and completely devoid of the over-the-top, messy emotionalism of Serafina's playing. It was a performance that reminded everyone in the room that true refinement doesn't need to scream for attention. When I finished, the room erupted into warm, genuine, highly respectful applause. I stood up calmly, smoothing the lapel of my jumpsuit. "Now that the entertainment portion of my weekend overtime has concluded," I said into the room, "the clinical nutrition station in the gallery is officially open for anyone interested in antioxidant cellular recovery infusions." The laughter from the guests was immediate and loud. Serafina's face went completely rigid. The studio head lifted his glass toward me. "Dr. Blake doesn't need to prove her elegance to anyone. Her recovery protocol is the only reason my liver survived executive pilot season." Serafina rushed over to Julian, grabbing his sleeve tightly. "Julian, look at her. She's doing this on purpose. She's trying to make everyone compare us." Julian looked down at her hand on his arm, his eyes completely hollow. "Serafina, you literally forced her onto the piano." "I wanted peace tonight. The reality is that Vivian performed a service, and she is going to invoice me for it. Please let it go. I walked past Marcus, tilting my head. Marcus, does this look like basic overtime or emotional hazard pay? The security chief didn't even blink. At this point, Dr. Blake, given the operational hostility, I am classifying this as active combat pay. Julian overheard the comment. For the first time in weeks, he didn't look annoyed at me. He looked deeply, profoundly guilty. Serafina saw that look, and her theatrical tears instantly dried up. People like her don't fear anger, they fear losing control of the script. Half an hour later, she found a new scene to play. She marched into the professional kitchen where the catering staff was setting up the late-night tasting plates and announced loudly, "Clear the line. I will be personally preparing Julian's midnight supper tonight." The executive sous chef dropped a silver tongue. Marcus went visibly pale. I stepped into the kitchen, looking up from my digital menu cards. "Absolutely not," I said, my voice dropping all professional warmth. Serafina turned around slowly, a look of complete pity on her face. "Excuse me? You don't get to dictate whether I cook for the man I love, Vivian. I know what his soul actually craves. I dictate exactly what enters that man's metabolic system while I am legally liable for his medical outcomes," I said, stepping between her and the high-end range. "You're just terrified, aren't you?" Serafina laughed, a mocking, superior sound. "Terrified that I'll prepare something from the heart that your clinical data could never replicate." Julian used to adore my red wine braised short ribs over garlic cream potatoes, followed by my artisanal triple espresso chocolate lava cake. I remember what truly brings him joy. I shot a glance through the kitchen window at Julian, who quickly looked away. That told me everything I needed to know. She had chosen a real memory, a highly toxic, incredibly high-acid, medically disastrous memory for someone with a healing peptic ulcer. "Julian cannot digest a single gram of that meal tonight, Miss Sterling." "Because you say so," she sneered. "Because his gastroenterologist says so," I shot back. "A heavy alcohol reduction, saturated dairy fats, deep-fried starches, high-intensity caffeine, and refined sugars will literally erode his stomach lining. He ate exactly like that for 5 years, which is why he had to hire a $1 million specialist because his digestive tract filed for a legal divorce." Julian stepped into the kitchen, muttering quietly. "Vivian, maybe a small portion wouldn't hurt? Just to celebrate her homecoming?" Serafina stepped closer to him, her eyes shining with manic devotion. "If you trust our cosmic bond, Julian, let me do this. Just one meal to prove I know your body better than an employee." The entire kitchen staff stood frozen, watching the standoff. Julian's jaw tightened. I knew that look. It was the classic look of a wealthy man choosing short-term domestic peace and sending the medical bill to someone else down the line. "Julian," I said firmly, meeting his eyes. "Don't do this." "Julian, please," Serafina whispered, looking incredibly fragile. Julian exhaled a long, defeated breath. "Vivian, just a small portion. It'll be fine." I immediately took a step back, raising my hands in the air. "Then I am officially logging off duty for the remainder of this meal service." Serafina smiled like she had just won a geopolitical war. "Fine. Leave the kitchen to the professionals of the soul." I unclipped my digital timer, folded my chef's apron with mathematical precision, and handed it directly to Marcus. "Marcus, please document the exact timestamp of my cessation of operational responsibility." Marcus pulled out his phone, his face grim. "I am documenting this with extreme spiritual urgency, doctor. Serafina took over the commercial kitchen like a whirlwind of complete chaos. She did not cook like someone trying to nourish a critically ill patient. She cooked like an influencer filming a high-drama cooking segment. She poured bottles of high-tannin Cabernet into the pan, dumped cups of heavy cream into the potatoes, and loaded the cake with rich espresso grounds and chili flakes for energetic warmth. The rich, heavy, highly acidic aroma that drifted out of the kitchen made Marcus look like he had aged another 5 years. The catering staff gathered around me in silent, panicked solidarity. I simply leaned against the marble prep counter, sipping an alkaline water, completely silent. Sometimes, the fastest way to teach an adult not to touch a hot stove is to stop blowing on the match. Serafina served Julian herself on the terrace, presenting the heavy plate with worshipful eyes. "Your true favorite, darling." Julian looked at the rich, glistening short ribs, then shot a terrified glance at me. I simply raised both hands in a neutral gesture. "Not my meal. Not my funeral." He took one bite. Serafina beamed. He took a second bite, the rich cream sauce coating his fork. The nearby guests pretended not to stare, but everyone was watching. By the third bite, Julian's face had turned an unnatural, slightly grayish shade of pale. By the fifth bite, beads of cold sweat broke out along his forehead, and he suddenly dropped his fork, his hand clamping violently over his upper abdomen. I pushed away from the counter instantly, shifting back into elite clinical mode. The professional detachment was gone, my patient was in crisis. "Marcus, warm alkaline water right now," I commanded, my voice cutting through the panic like a siren. "Retrieve his prescribed mucosal protective medication from my clinical kit. Prepare the low-temperature recovery broth from the blue vacuum container. Call Dr. Vance's private gastroenterologist immediately if his heart rate spikes." Serafina's triumphant smile completely collapsed. What are you doing? Why are you ruining my moment?" "I'm doing my job, Miss Sterling," I snapped, pushing past her without an ounce of ceremony. "An incredibly difficult job that you just systematically sabotaged for character development." "How dare you," she shrieked, but nobody was looking at her. Julian was doubled over in his chair, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might crack. I moved with absolute, military precision, no performance, no drama. I administered the medication, handed him the warm alkaline water, applied a targeted heat pad to his abdomen, and instructed him to take slow, controlled diaphragmatic breaths. I directed the staff to clear the terrace, moving the whispering crowd away. Marcus was on his phone, reporting symptoms to the doctor like a medic on a battlefield. Serafina hovered in the corner, looking completely useless and small. I only wanted to cook from the heart. "You didn't cook from the heart," I said coldly, without looking up from Julian's pulse. "You auditioned for a tragedy, and my client almost paid the price." The medical crisis took 2 agonizing hours to stabilize inside Julian's private study. The party slowly dissolved, half the guests leaving while whispering about the disaster, and the other half staying because Hollywood elite love real-life medical drama almost as much as free champagne. When Julian finally sat upright, pale but breathing normally, Serafina rushed into the study, reaching for his arm. "Julian, oh my God, I was so terrified. That nutritionist must have set a negative intention." Julian slowly, deliberately pulled his arm away from her touch. His voice was incredibly quiet, but it carried a terrifying weight. "Vivian warned you. Marcus warned you. My entire medical team warned this household before you ever returned from Bali. You ignored every single piece of reality because it didn't fit into your spiritual script. Serafina went completely still, her eyes widening. Julian. I did it out of pure love. Vivian is my medical clinician, Julian said, his voice completely firm. You turned my chronic illness into a plot point for your ego. You are officially barred from entering the kitchen. You will not speak to Dr. Blake without my legal counsel present. You will not interfere with staff, deliveries, or medical plans. If you violate a single professional boundary again, the foundation funding is permanently terminated, and I will have security escort you from the property. Serafina's lips trembled violently. You're choosing a chef over your twin flame? I am choosing survival over a woman who tried to poison me with heavy cream for a romantic narrative, Julian said flatly. For once, Serafina had no audience. The remaining guests were looking at her with complete disgust. She ran out of the room crying, her white linen dress disappearing into the Malibu night. No one followed her. I returned to my Beverly Hills penthouse at 3 a.m. Before I even took off my designer jumpsuit, I opened my laptop and sent a comprehensive, updated invoice to Vance Media Holdings, Emergency Gastroduodenal Recovery Protocol, $15,000, Public Ambush Performance Mitigation, $10,000, First Love Boundary Containment, $20,000, Executive Combat Pay per Assistant Request, $25,000. Julian called my phone exactly 5 minutes later. Vivian, you're literally billing me for First Love Boundary Containment? Mr. Vance, I said smoothly, pouring myself a glass of wine. Your cosmic partner mistook my professional uniform for a romantic threat and tried to season your stomach lining into an early grave. I am being incredibly generous with my hourly rates. There was a long, heavy silence on the line. Then, Julian let out a real laugh, a low, tired, deeply embarrassed laugh. You're right. I should have protected your clinical space from the beginning. I am sorry, Vivian. No excuses. I accept the apology as a strictly professional matter, I replied. Now get some rest, your stomach is still legally my problem until next quarter. The peace, however, didn't last long. The next morning, Marcus arrived at my penthouse with an absolute monster of a leather-bound binder. It was over 4 inches thick. What is that? I asked, staring at it. My operational survival log, Marcus said with absolute gravity. The Serafina Sterling incident reports. I believe you will find this data useful for your records. I opened the first page. It was an absolute masterpiece of administrative pettiness. Day 1. Requested termination of security chief for presenting historical real estate data. Day 2. Destroyed corporate smartphone with a quartz crystal after being shown evidence of client smiling. Day 3. Attempted to locate non-existent heartbreak tower. Day 5. Reinterpreted standard corporate contract as romantic captivity. Day 10. Interfere with low FODMAP kitchen prep, causing a grade 4 medical flare-up. At the very end of the binder, Marcus had included a professional summary, recommendation, immediate removal of target individual from all operational environments before staff morale drops below freezing point. I stared at Marcus. His face was entirely serious. Dr. Blake, with all due respect, if that woman remains on the estate, I will become the first security chief in history to resign via walking into the Pacific Ocean. I laughed so hard I had to sit down on my marble floor. But Serafina wasn't done. Within 48 hours, she began posting vague, highly poetic, passive-aggressive videos on her social media platforms. Some women wear clinical uniforms and call it medicine, but true muses understand the soul. The replacement always thinks she won the house, but the final chapter belongs to the first love. A nutritionist who spends too much time managing the master's lifestyle should remember the kitchen is not the bedroom. That last video made my hand stop mid-scroll. I could ignore being called a placeholder. I could ignore her spiritual tantrums and her fake shrine rooms. But I would absolutely not tolerate someone attempting to damage my clinical reputation, my medical integrity, or my professional name within the high-end Los Angeles market. I let her call me a substitute, but I would never let her call me incompetent, or worse, available. I immediately began gathering my receipts. I compiled my certified Mayo Clinic credentials, my executive employment contract, Julian's official medical charts, the detailed invoices, the gold-embossed gala invitation, the time-stamped security footage of her entering my penthouse, the commercial kitchen camera footage of her dumping heavy cream into the pans while ordering the staff to step back, and Marcus's impeccable incident logs. If Serafina wanted to write a final chapter, I was about to introduce her to the concept of professional editing. Julian came to my penthouse that evening. For the first time, he arrived without Marcus as a human shield. I saw the social media videos, I said, leaning against my kitchen island. Congratulations, your muse has discovered defamation with high-end video filters. Julian's jaw tightened, his expression deeply worn. I'm handling it, Vivian. I thought if I moved you away, paid you more, and kept everyone in separate boxes, the drama would settle down. I was wrong. I know you didn't choose to get dragged into this. You didn't choose her over me romantically, Julian, I said, my voice cutting through his self-pity. You chose her fragile ego over my literal workplace safety and professional reputation. That's the real issue. His eyes dropped to the floor. I am deeply sorry. There is no defense. That was rarer than a perfectly clean kitchen after a 60-person gala. I crossed my arms. So, what happens now? Because my lawyers are currently drafting a cease and desist that will make her social media accounts look like a legal desert. Julian placed a sleek, matte black corporate folder onto my counter. This is what happens next. It's not hush money, because you would have charged me triple. I opened the folder. Inside were fully drafted corporate formation articles for the Blake Table, Clinical Culinary Wellness Studios. It was a comprehensive business plan for an elite, high-end medical meal planning and private recovery dining service based in Brentwood, specializing in gastrointestinal health for ultra-high net worth clients. Founder and CEO, Dr. Vivian Blake. Equity ownership, 80% Vivian Blake, 20% Vance Media Holdings, non-voting shares. The initial launch funding was completely covered by Julian's firm, with a guaranteed client list derived from his entire executive network. My name was on the building. My recipes stayed entirely mine. My independence was absolute. This is a real future, I murmured, flipping through the financial projections. You earned it, Julian said quietly. And your lawyer can review it tonight. This ensures your professional reputation is completely detached from my personal life. You aren't a private chef in a billionaire's house anymore, you are a brand. I closed the folder with a satisfying snap. I'll have my legal team look over the buyout clauses. And don't look so miserable, Julian. Your first love circus just generated enough billable trauma to fund my entire global franchise. The grand launch of the Blake Table took place exactly 3 weeks later in a stunning, glass-walled culinary pavilion in Brentwood. The space was gorgeous, polished surgical steel kitchens, a vertical living herb wall, and private clinical consultation suites. My name was etched into the frosted glass near the entrance, Dr. Vivian Blake, founder. The opening event was packed. Top gastroenterologists from UCLA, elite Hollywood showrunners, old money clients, and high-net-worth executives were mingling, enjoying my signature pH-balanced botanical infusions. Marcus arrived early, looking radiant, wearing an immaculate suit and an expression of profound peace. "You look remarkably rested, Marcus," I noted, handing him a glass. "I slept an uninterrupted 8 hours last night, doctor," he said, his voice trembling with genuine emotion. "I thought I had passed away and been promoted to heaven. My phone hasn't been shattered by a wellness crystal in 21 days. Julian arrived later, dressed in a sharp dark suit. He didn't hover around me, nor did he act like he owned the event. He simply mingled, introduced me to several high-profile venture capitalists as the brilliant founder of the company, and let my academic data speak for itself. Then, the elevator doors slid open at the back of the pavilion, and a collective hush fell over the immediate area. Serafina walked out. She was wearing white, naturally, but this time it wasn't a floating linen dress. It was a sharp, tightly tailored pantsuit, looking more like a wounded, vengeful corporate widow than a spiritual goddess. Marcus immediately closed his eyes, taking a deep, calming breath. Serafina marched straight through the crowd, her face a mask of trembling, righteous indignation. She stopped directly in front of my tasting counter. "So this is what your little manifestation was all about," she said, her voice shaking with narrative drama. "My lifestyle, my status, my partner. You used medical jargon and pureed soups to seduce your way into his corporate portfolio." A prominent plastic surgeon nearby literally choked on his cucumber water. I calmly laid down my gold-plating tongs. "Good evening, Miss Sterling. Are you here as a registered guest, or am I currently billing Mr. Vance for another live event?" Her eyes flashed with rage. "You were never just a clinician. Everyone thinks you're so clinical and detached because you hide behind contracts and data. But I know what you are. You're a social climber." Julian stepped forward to intervene, but I simply lifted one finger, stopping him in his tracks. "Not yet, Julian. Let the final chapter play out. You wore white in his kitchen." Serafina shouted, her voice rising to a dramatic crescendo that captured the attention of every doctor and billionaire in the room. "You moved into his Beverly Hills penthouse. You played piano at my homecoming. You made yourself completely necessary to his daily life. You systematically replaced me." I looked around the room, at the elite medical community, my high-profile clients, the corporate board members, and Marcus holding his secure tablet. "Since Miss Sterling has raised public questions regarding my professional scope of work," I announced, my voice completely clear and professional, "let's look at the verified data." Marcus tapped the master control screen on his tablet. Instantly, the massive, high-definition presentation screens across the entire culinary studio lit up. The first slide displayed my fully executed independent clinical contract, highlighting my annual salary, my required medical duties, and the explicit dietetic protocols approved by Julian's medical board. The next slide showed the official weekend overtime addendums, the itemized invoices for the gala, and the specific line item labeled active combat pay per security discretion. A wave of muffled, amused laughter instantly rippled through the crowd of high society guests. Serafina's face went completely pale. The screen changed again. It displayed an official clinical letter from Julian's gastroenterologist detailing his severe peptic ulcer disease and the strict medical mandate to avoid heavy wine reductions, saturated dairy fats, and high-intensity caffeine. Right next to it was the time-stamped commercial kitchen footage from the Malibu Gala. The video clearly showed Serafina shoving the professional staff aside, dumping bottles of wine and cups of heavy cream into the pans, and explicitly instructing the sous chef not to let Dr. Blake interfere with her cosmic meal. The final slide displayed a side-by-side compilation of her public social media videos accusing me of using my profession to hide an emotional affair, contrasted directly against the secure building log showing that Julian had never once entered the Beverly Hills penthouse during my residency. The atmosphere in the room went ice-cold. It wasn't a look of shock on the guests' faces, it was a look of profound, high society disgust. In a room filled with people who valued corporate compliance, medical privacy, and professional execution above all else, Serafina looked less like a romantic heroine and more like an unstable liability. I turned back to face her. "I was hired to heal a metabolic system, Miss Sterling. You were the only person in that house desperately trying to turn medical labor into a daytime soap opera." Julian stepped right beside me, his expression completely unyielding. "Vivian was never your replacement, Serafina. She was the medical specialist who saved me from an emergency room recurrence. You turned a severe gastric illness into a supporting character for your personal drama. We are completely finished." Serafina's lips trembled, her eyes flooding with tears. "Julian, you told me I was your ultimate muse." Julian looked at her for a very long, quiet moment. "I loved the girl I remembered from Sedona. Tonight, I am looking at a woman who literally tried to erode my stomach lining for a social media caption." The room didn't erupt into dramatic applause that would have been far too theatrical for Brentwood. Instead, something infinitely more devastating happened to a woman like Serafina. The elite crowd simply turned away from her. The venture capitalists returned to their tasting spoons, the doctors resumed talking about data, and the high-profile clients looked back at my name emblazoned on the wall, completely erasing her presence. She was no longer a beautiful disruption, she was just an awkward interruption. Marcus stepped forward, holding a heavy, cream-colored corporate envelope. "Miss Sterling. This is a formal, legally executed restraining order and workplace protection notice. You are permanently barred from entering any property owned by Vance Media, any private residence occupied by Mr. Vance, and any commercial facility operated under the Blake Table brand. Any further harassment toward Dr. Blake or her staff will result in an immediate civil lawsuit for corporate defamation." Serafina stared at the envelope as if it were a physical weapon. She looked at Julian, but his eyes were completely fixed on his wellness infusion. She looked at me, and I simply picked up my tasting spoon, checking the temperature of a low-acid reduction. She turned and left the studio, wrapped in her sharp white pantsuit, but she didn't look like a victorious romantic lead anymore. She looked like a disposable napkin that a high-end room had finally decided to throw into the trash. By midnight, the leaked footage from the launch event went absolutely viral across Los Angeles media circles. The snippets were pristine. You turned a severe gastric illness into a supporting character for your personal drama. I am choosing survival over a woman who tried to poison me with cream sauce for a script line. The internet did what the internet does best. The hashtags exploded by morning. Hashtag gastritis heroin, hashtag the broth climax, hashtag cream sauce disaster. My favorite comment on the viral thread was incredibly simple. Imagine trying to stage a classic romance novel coup and losing your entire trust fund to a clinical nutritionist's paperwork and a cup of bone broth. Serafina completely vanished from the elite Los Angeles invitation lists within 48 hours. The luxury brands that once sponsored her wellness foundation quietly severed ties, citing reputational liability. High-end estates quietly instructed their gatekeepers to refuse her entry, and her friends stopped tagging her in their Hamptons stories. Her social media accounts went strictly private. It wasn't a dramatic prison sentence, it was a total social erasure, the exact kind of death that people who live for the spotlight fear most. The room had simply refused to play along with her script. A week later, she attempted to visit the Blake Table studio one final time during prep hours. There was no white suit, no dramatic lighting, and no audience. She was wearing a simple, beige trench coat, her eyes looked exhausted, and her aura of superior hydration had completely evaporated. Marcus looked ready to signal the security team with pure professional joy, but I quietly raised a hand, stopping him. "Give us 5 minutes, Marcus." Serafina stood near the entrance of my beautiful, pristine kitchen, looking incredibly small against the polished steel appliances. "I was terrified," she whispered, her voice cracking without any dramatic modulation. I thought that if you stayed in his life, my entire identity would disappear. I thought he didn't need me anymore." I looked at her, adjusting the digital scale on my counter. "He didn't need a twin flame, Serafina. He needed medical-grade antacids, a strict low-FODMAP meal plan, and basic emotional boundaries." She flinched slightly, her shoulders slumping. "You hate me because I tried to push you out." "I don't hate you at all," I said, my voice completely calm, grounded, and professional. "You didn't hate me because I was a replacement. You hated me because I represented reality, and reality doesn't require a script to be valuable. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a corporate wellness expansion to manage." She looked at my name on the frosted glass one last time, turned around, and walked out into the bright, unyielding California sun. I picked up my clinical knife, checked the weight of my organic ginger root, and went right back to work.